Let's go get it. Hey, everyone. This is Dr. Jason Clemmons at the Rock Health and Wellness Center, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. We're coming to you live right here from the Rock Health and Wellness Center studios, and we're also coming to you on 98.7 FM Walk by Faith Radio and all the associated stations that go along with that. So we are super glad to be here tonight. It's Wednesday night, October 18th, and we've got our book review night that we do on Wednesday nights. And this is going to be a really interesting book review because we're going to talk about a subject that probably has touched a lot of us out there over the years in one form or fashion, and that's cancer. And so it's going to be a really interesting night. It's going to be an interesting book review and some thoughts that go along with cancer. And we've got two separate books that I wanted to bring to you because they're basically the same concept, the same ideas, but one of them is written by a PhD that gets really technical on cancer, and the other one is written by um, a master's degree person. I don't know. I'll explain it to you in a minute, but he's a writer. He's not an MD, and he's super great. He's a super great writer, but he wrote the same information in his book in a different way. So and that you can understand it better. So we're going to get into that tonight because I really thought this would be a cool book on our book review night. It's been several years since I read it. It's called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, and it's by Thomas N. Seyfried, and it's really interesting. So we will get to that here in just a few minutes, but just wanted to welcome everybody to the show. Welcome everybody that's watching us on Facebook and YouTube and X. You guys that keep the comments and everything going, we really appreciate it. If anybody has a question that they would like to ask us tonight, or about any of the shows that we have done, or about the show that we're doing tonight, um, feel free to send us some message. You can send it to us on our text line at 806-794-0400, which is also our office phone number. That is also how you can get a hold of us if you're trying to make an appointment or you want to talk to me about something. You can send us a text or give us a call at that same number, 806-794-0400. Or you can send us a message on Facebook, YouTube, or X, and we will get it either now or we'll get it later on. So, and I'll try to get back to them and make sure I answer them and answer any questions that you might have. So you can send that to us if you do have any questions. So um, I wanted to remind everyone of our little contest. We're having a contest in case you didn't see last night's show or Monday night's show. We're having a contest, and we're trying to remind where that you can guess how many Red Hots are in a 20-ounce soda bottle. So the Red Hots represent some sort of pharmaceutical drug that you might take. Right? Last night we talked about hydrocodone, birth control pills, blood pressure pills, all those different things that people take. Right? And a lot of times I have patients come into the office and they'll say, "Doc, I only drink one Coke a day." And I always think to myself, man, if you took one blood pressure pill, you could drop your blood pressure. Or if you took one birth control pill, you could keep from getting pregnant. I wonder how many birth control pills you could put in a 20-ounce soda bottle. I wonder what the physiology of one soda bottle does to a person, right? So I had Kim go get a soda bottle and fill it up with Red Hots, and I know the number. So you can guess at how many Red Hots are in this bottle. You can send us a text. You can send us a guess on Facebook, YouTube, or X. And if you win a $50 gift certificate to Longhorn Steakhouse in Lubbock. And if you're not in Lubbock, I will find you your favorite place to eat in whatever town you're at, as long as it's got some healthy options where you can go get you, because you can get some relatively healthy options at Longhorn Steakhouse in Lubbock. I've done it. They have an awesome steak, sweet potato, butter only, and a salad, and that's pretty decent meal right there. So you can control the majority of your insulin. You can control that. Just leave the bread alone, and then um, you have to kind of balance your 6 threes with maybe a little bit extra fish oil. But yeah, so if you want to take a guess, take a guess. If you guys are listening on the radio, just imagine a 20-ounce soda bottle and imagine how big a Red Hot is, and just imagine how many of them would fit in a soda bottle, right? So just one cookie a day. We might do it again sometime. Do another contest with a cookie. That might be another contest that we could have, was just to see if we're how many birth control pills could you get in a cookie. Now, obviously, let me make sure that everybody understands the contest. I do not want anybody to take a 20-ounce bottle of soda full of birth control pills or blood pressure pills or hydrocodone, right? That will kill you. Do not do that. That's not what we're trying to say. What we're trying to say is we don't think about those things that change our metabolism on a daily basis, that we try to argue for our stance on it, right? We try to say it's just one Coke, it's just one soda. What could possibly be wrong with just one soda? Come on, right? Well, it's an illustration. That's the point. And if you win, you get a gift certificate. So take your guesses. We've got some guesses already. I'm not telling you what they are, but somebody's going to win. So there's another guess. There we go. So, and you can try it yourself. You can take a bunch of Red Hots and fill up your own 20-ounce bottle and see how close you get. So, might be worth less than $50 to do that to you, and you might win the gift certificate. So, um, I will keep them coming. I'll keep them coming. We'll do it till the end of the month, and then that'll be the Halloween uh, reward, fall festival reward, whatever you want to call it. My birthday's on the 26th. Maybe I'll just do it, and that'll be my birthday reward for you is a $50 gift certificate. So let's get into the show tonight. Every Wednesday night, we do some sort of breakdown of a book that I've read somewhere along the way. And we just try to go through some of the information, right? Because it's like that's what doctors do. They read a lot, and we read a lot of different stuff. And I try to keep a broad range of things that I read, and it all comes back to health. And when you're doing wellness and you're doing health, you can pretty much take everything and bring it back. So it was a few years back, and I don't really remember who brought the book to me. I don't remember where I saw it. It could have been when at one of my seminars that I went to. Could have been my man Dan Murphy that teaches me a bunch of stuff. I don't exactly remember who brought this book to me or where I saw it, but it got my attention, and I read it, and it's a very complicated, very scientific book. It's called Cancer as a Metabolic Disease: On the Origin, Management, and Prevention of Cancer by Thomas N. Seyfried. And um, Thomas N. Seyfried, PhD, has taught and conducted research in the fields of neurogenics, neurochemistry, and cancer for more than 25 years at Yale University and Boston College. He has published more than 150 scientific articles and book chapters, and is on the editorial board of the Nutrition and Metabolism, Journal of Lipid Research, Neurochemical Research, and ASN Neuro. So, Dr. Seyfried has spent a lifetime researching and researching cancer and metabolism and how it works. And he's pretty opinionated on it. And when I read the book, first of all, let me make sure everybody understands that we're very clear about what we're doing, right? I am a wellness chiropractor. I'm a doctor of chiropractic in the state of Texas, and it's not within my scope of practice to treat cancer. So I'm not treating cancer, nor am I making a recommendation to treat your cancer, nor am I criticizing any doctor that you have that treated your cancer or your child's cancer or anybody's cancer or are currently treating them. I am not in any form or fashion throwing stones at the cancer people of in any manner, right? Because I tell you what, it it's a horrible disease. It's a horrible disease, and it can strike in all kinds of different places. And it's just one of those things that's like it's not something to joke around about. It's not something to be a smart aleck about, and I take it very seriously when I'm talking about some of this. I've had it. I've had leukemia. I haven't had leukemia. I've had leukemia strike people that were close to me at different points. One of the coaches I used to coach for lost his son that was born in October, that was my age. Um, that he died when he was 10 or 11 or 12 years old. I don't know exactly the year, but from leukemia. I've had patient that has had leukemia who overcame leukemia, who had fantastic care from the doctors here in Lubbock, and got to ring the bell and made it through all that. So it's a very serious situation that that I want to make sure that everyone that's listening to the show is very clear that what I'm trying to do tonight is I'm trying to share information that might help you if you're dealing with it, and it might help you before you ever have to deal with it. So I got this book. I read it. It was very difficult to read. It was very complicated, but it had some general ideas. And and so I'm going to try tonight to go through some of those ideas and share some of those ideas with you. Now, right after that, I got this other book, and and I'm sure they were connected because I don't remember when I read this book. The copyright. Um, let me see here. The copyright of this book is 2012, so it very well could have been a while back when I first read this book. And I do not I don't know the current argument. I don't know if current research has totally said that Dr. Seyfried's information is bogus. I don't know that if the current research says that Dr. Seyfried's right on track. Right? I don't know. He's pretty confident, and I have always just gone to, when I've just taken this information. Any of my patients who've ever had cancer, almost all of them, I have brought this to their attention so that they could understand it. But right after that, because it's a very scientific book, I got this other book, and this book is called Tripping Over the Truth: How the Metabolic Theory of Cancer is Overturning One of Medicine's Most Entrenched Paradigms. And this is Travis Christofferson, MS. And so Travis Christofferson received his undergraduate degree in molecular biology from Montana State University Honors Program and a master's degree in material engineer and science from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology. Today, he is a full-time science writer and founder of Single Cause, Single Cure. He lives in South Dakota. And basically what he did is he took this Dr. Seyfried's book and wrote it in layman's terms. So if something that you hear tonight makes some sense to you, or it actually helps you in some form or fashion, you might enjoy tripping over the truth. Um, what I've learned is that the people that get cancer are dadgum serious about trying to win that battle, right? They will they will get a scientific book and they will break it down even if they don't even understand how to read a scientific book. Because once that's the thing about it, it's all fun and games until you get cancer. It's all fun and games until you have a heart attack. It's all fun and games until you get diabetes. It's all fun and games until you're faced with one of those situations. And then it becomes very, very serious, or it becomes death. I mean, when you get into a life and death situation, it's amazing. It's amazing how people will quit drinking their cokes whenever they get a cancer diagnosis. It's like all of a sudden they will study the living heck out of health, because as soon as you lose your health, it really does get your attention on what trying to get it back, right? And so let's just talk about some things in general first, and then let's get into what Dr. Seyfried is saying about cancer and 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 some of his ideas. Okay, so let's start. Let's back up first, and let's talk about something that we talk about almost on every show, right? And we talk about that omega 3 and 6 ratio, right? But let's start off by looking at a cell. So let's just think about what a cell looks like. And then we've got inside the cell, we have a nucleus. And inside that nucleus is our DNA, right? And then we've got this thing called the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is the power plant of the cell. That's what makes the energy of the cell, right? And we've talked about this lots of times. And we've talked about why it's so important. Remember, when we make when we make the energy in the cell, we make ATP. And that's the energy that the cell runs off of. But every time we make ATP, we make a free radical. And the free radical is a little irritated molecule that turns around and attacks the mitochondria and causes damage. I was talking to one of my patients that I did a report with today, and we were talking about mitochondria, and we were talking about antioxidants because antioxidants balance mitochondria. They cancel out. I mean, not the antioxidants cancel out free radicals inside the cell, which keeps us from destroying that mitochondria. If we destroy the mitochondria, the cell is going to die. If you lose the power to the cell will kick in this thing called apoptosis. Apoptosis. And that means programmed cell death. So the nucleus of the cell has this information inside of it that if this cell starts to go wrong, we're going to just kill this cell. We're going to cancel it out. We're going to kill the cell, right? And so we've talked about multiple times, we've talked about the omega-6-3 ratio, because that cell wall is made up of omega-6s and omega-3s along with a lot of other things. But a couple of the things that it's made of is omega-6s and 3s. And remember, the 6s make it rigid and the 3s make it fluid. And we need to be able to have a good balance between the two, right? Just like if you were making pancakes and it said put a cup of oil in there and you put a gallon of oil in there, you would not be able to make a pancake because it'd be running all over the place, right? You wouldn't have any form to the pancake. It would just go all over the place, right? And at the same time, if it said put 2 cups of flour in there, and I know none of y'all eat pancakes anymore and you don't eat that flour. I get it, but I'm just using it as an example. But if it says to use 2 cups of flour, and you put 18 cups of flour in there would be no way that you would be able to have a pancake because you just have a blob. You wouldn't be able to even pour it out of the bowl, right? So we know that there's a balance between flour or Bisquick or however you make your pancakes and oil. There's a balance between the two in order to make a proper pancake. There's a balance between omega-6s and omega-3s inside the cell, which balances out to make sure that there's a cell wall that has enough rigidity to make a cell wall, and it has enough fluidity to be able to pass things through it. And that's how we get to those antioxidants. That's how we build that number one antioxidant called glutathione. And glutathione is the granddaddy of all antioxidants. It's the old wise one with a little bit of gray in its beard that keeps the free radicals from attacking the mitochondria. And it stops that and it protects the mitochondria, right? So that's why in what we talk about with nutrition, when we're talking about balancing your omega-6-3 ratio, that is one of the main things that we're trying to do is protect the mitochondria, because we don't want the mitochondria to be damaged, because if the mitochondria gets damaged, it's going to cause problems inside the cell, and the cell is going to go into apoptosis and kill itself, right? So we got to make sure that we're not creating damage to that mitochondria. And I have been studying, and every time I see an article that has anything to do with mitochondrial damage, I save that article. I'm like, all right, just put that in a file, right? Well, I've got articles and I may have talked about it before, but I've got articles when it's talking about mitochondria that are talking about wrinkles. Like you get increased amount of wrinkles come from damage to the mitochondria. I've got articles that talk about kidney disease being reversed by protecting the mitochondria. And every single time they talk about that, they talk about omega-3 fatty acids. They talk about the fundamentals that we talked about last night on the show, right? Omega-3 fatty acids protect the mitochondria and keep the power on to the body. That's that's how your body works. Like if you're not doing that, then it's not fundamental, right? Okay. So what does that have to do with Dr. Seyfried's book, right? Well, so Dr. Seyfried's book breaks down. It starts by talking about what we're doing in cancer. Like what is cancer? What is happening inside to a cell? How is a tumor created? How does a tumor spread throughout the body? What are the functioning things of cancer? But one of the things he points out right in the very beginning is that he says this. He said, "Look, I've been keeping statistics on cancer, and this he starts in 1990." And he goes all the way to 2010, and then he wrote the book in 2012. But he so this is from 1990 to 2010. Heart disease in the United States is the number one killer in the United States. If you go to the CDC and you look, you will see that heart disease is the number one killer in the United States. But it's only the number one killer in the United States once you get the 85 and up group involved in the statistics. Before you get the 85 or 80-year-olds or something like that, before that, cancer is the number one killer in the United States. Cancer beats heart disease in all of those. Last time I looked, cancer beats heart disease in all of the categories from young, when you get to that middle age, like 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, it's cancer, then heart disease, cancer, then heart disease, cancer, then heart disease. But then when you put the 85-year-olds in there, it flips it, and that heart disease is the number one killer. And so Dr. Seyfried puts this table in here from 1990 to 2010, and he says the number of new cases in 1990 was 1,040,000 new cases in a year. The number of deaths per year was 510,000. The number of deaths per year was 510,000, and the number of deaths per day was 1,397. Okay, so that was in 1990. There was 1,397 people a day dying of cancer. And he points out how many billions and billions of dollars that we've spent in government working on cancer, right? How many billions of dollars we spent trying to get the cure for cancer from 1990 all the way to 2010, when in 2010, the number of new cases was 1,529,560. The number of deaths per year was 569,490, and the number of deaths per day was 1,560 people. So in 1990, we went from 1,397 people dying per day to 2010, 1,560 people dying per day. And what Dr. Seyfried says, not me, but Dr. Seyfried, what Dr. Seyfried says is, look, we've spent billions and billions of dollars to analyze what's going on with cancer in completely the wrong direction. We're missing the boat when it comes to cancer. And that's his argument. It's not my argument. I don't know anything about it. I'm just sharing with you what Dr. Seyfried said, right? That's the argument that he's going to make. He's going to say to us that we're not looking in the right place. And what he says in the book is where we look is at the genetics. We want to look at what's going on because we say, well, there's some sort of genetics that's going on inside that cell. So everything is looking at the nucleus of the cell. And and when you look at the nucleus of the cell and you get in there to the genetics, you get into the DNA, there must be something that's wrong with the genetics that's causing the body to go into this cancer situation. There has to be something right there that makes it go into the cancerous situation and turns that particular cell into a cancerous cell. And then when that cancer cell divides and it goes into two separate cells, now that cancer cell turns into two cancerous cells. And he's like, well, okay, that makes total sense. Um, we're coming up on a break on the radio right here. So I want to make sure that everybody that's listening gets the opportunity to hear what we're talking about. So when we get back from the break, we'll break down exactly what he talks about and what is going on with cancer and what are some of the options we can do to solve this cancer problem, or at least help ourselves be better when it comes to cancer. So we'll take a break here on the radio. We'll just visit for a minute on the Facebook page and on YouTube and X, and then we'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll break this down for you so that you can have an idea of what's happening with cancer. So we'll be right back. Yeah, it's really interesting when you get into the statistics and you start looking at how much money we're spending on stuff, right? And I mentioned that just well last week when we were talking through the body by Bill Bryson, and we were talking about penicillin or something, I think, and how one person, or no, it was cholera, maybe. We were talking about someone that had exposed themselves to cholera and they didn't have any sort of response to it. It wasn't any big deal. And I said, see, that doesn't cause sickness. And then their assistants exposed themselves to it and they ended up getting super sick, right? And what they later found out was that original person had been exposed to it previously and they had some sort of immune, they had an immunity to it. And that one person slowed down the process of how to get to the answer. Well, what Dr. Seyfried is saying in the book here is that we've spent so much money looking in the wrong place and that we've missed the boat. We've missed the boat on exactly. We're looking at the nucleus and we're saying that all cancers are genetic. And what he's fixing to point out in the book, and I'm gonna draw it for you when we get back from the break, is that he doesn't think it's genetic. He thinks that the initial stages of it are coming from the mitochondria. That there's a mitochondrial damage problem, and the mitochondria are the ones that are having problem with respiration. They're having problems breathing. They're having problems making ATP, and that's the cause of the cancer. And he's got a pretty interesting argument. So it goes back for us. It's like, hey, that's part of the reason that I think it's so important to protect your mitochondria, to try to make sure that you're not attacking the mitochondria, so that you can keep that cell as healthy as possible. And that's where the glutathione thing comes in, right? And there's some things you could do. We probably should post this somewhere so you can have it, and you can get it from me if you want to. But there's some things that you can do to increase glutathione. And one of the things you can do is undenatured whey protein, like in a smoothie. If you want to do some undenatured whey protein, has been shown to increase glutathione. Another thing, believe it or not, is a very small shot on a daily basis of pomegranate juice. Now, we're not big fans of juice in our show, right? Because we know that juice is fructose and we got to watch our fructose intake. But pomegranate juice actually increases glutathione. Another thing is N-acetylcysteine. You may have seen it in the stores, or NAC. Some people call it NAC, right? The NAC, the N-acetylcysteine, there's another thing that you can do to increase glutathione. But you got to make sure when you do all of that stuff that you have that 6:3 ratio. Right? Okay, everybody, we're back on the show. We're talking about cancer as a metabolic disease from Dr. Thomas Seyfried, and we're talking about what's going on inside the cell. This is Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, Wednesday, October 18th. So we're going to get back to it, and we're going to talk to you about exactly what's going on and what Dr. Seyfried says is going on, right? So he says that where we spent our money over the last 30, 40 years, however many billions and even trillions of dollars that we've spent it looking at genetic problems being the problem with cancer, right? Or it's something that has to do with the nucleus and the DNA, and that maybe we're getting exposed to something, some sort of carcinogen that messes up the nucleus in some form or fashion. But it's really interesting because he has some some research that he's shown where he has different cells. He says this. Okay, when you have a healthy cell, when you have a healthy cell, and that healthy cell divides, and that healthy cell has a healthy nucleus. Okay, and that healthy nucleus that cell divides. And that cell has a healthy nucleus, but it also has a healthy cytoplasm, which is those little organelles inside the cell where the mitochondria is one of them. So if you have a healthy cell and that cell divides, then basically you get two healthy cells. Okay. And this is the argument. This is the argument that's made. If you have a cancerous cell, and the cancerous cell, they say, well, it's got something wrong with the nucleus. That's what's causing it. But it's got a cancerous cytosol. The rest of it in the middle of it, where the mitochondria are, is also cancerous. When that cell divides, now you get two cancer cells. And if you get enough cancer cells put together, that's where you end up with a tumor, right? So you get one cell that turns into another cancer cell, that turns into another cancer cell. And then when the immune system, the macrophages get involved with it, they will attach to that and they'll carry it throughout your body. That's called metastasis. That's when cancer spreads, right? And that's a bad deal. Well, they also looked at a healthy cell, that was a normal cell that had a cancerous nucleus, but it had a normal cytosol. It had normal mitochondria. And what happened when that cell divided? When that cell divided, that ended up with two normal cells with a cancerous nucleus, but the cell was normal. But then, if you had a cancerous cell that had a normal nucleus, but a cancerous mitochondria, when that cell divided, you got a cancer cell. Let me make sure I got that straight for you, okay? If the nucleus of that cell is normal, but the mitochondria was damaged, what you ended up with, and it was a cancer cell, what you ended up with when it divided was two cancer cells. So it's a really interesting thought right there, right? If you have a normal cell with a normal nucleus and a normal mitochondria, and that cell divides, then you've got a healthy normal cell. If you've got a cancerous cell with a cancerous nucleus and a cancerous mitochondria, when that cell divides, you end up with a cancer cell, two cancer cells. When you have a normal cell that has a cancerous nucleus, you have some sort of problem with the DNA, but it has a normal mitochondria. When it divides, you end up with two normal cells, even though their nucleus are cancerous. But if you have a cancerous cell that has a normal nucleus, but it has a cancerous mitochondria, when it divides, you'll end up with a cancer cell. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but what Dr. Seyfried's argument is that look, it's not the nucleus that's the problem. It's not your genetics that's the problem. What the problem is is it's the mitochondria that's the problem. And one thing that scientists believe, and you can take it or leave it depending on how you feel about things, but what scientists believe is that in the process of evolution, and it doesn't mean that we had a big bang and then boom, we evolved, but you could say that there has been some evolution, right? Well, the the argument is that mitochondria at one point in time was its own cell, and it was its own thing. It was its own independent thing, and it got taken in to the cells of the body to create the power for the body, and it became part of the cell itself, the mitochondria. But the mitochondria has its own DNA, and the mitochondria can run itself. It's got its own DNA. So if you have a messed up nucleus, if you have a messed up nucleus, but you have a healthy mitochondria, you can get a healthy cell, right? So that's the power plant of the cell. The mitochondria is the power plant of the cell. And what Dr. Seyfried explained to me was this. He explained to me that what happens in a cancerous cell is what we do normally is we take glucose, which is blood sugar, and we bring glucose into the cell. And there's a process, there's a long process. I'll just make it really, really simple. We bring the glucose into the cell, and there's some steps that are taking place. But basically, the mitochondria uses glucose to produce ATP. That's the simple way of saying it right there. Glucose is blood sugar. Remember, we've talked about blood sugar multiple times on the show. Glucose is blood sugar. So what normally happens in a cell, if you've got some oxygen involved, is glucose through a process is going to be able to come into the mitochondria, and you're going to end up with energy. That's basically what's going to happen, right? Well, if you don't have any oxygen involved, then it changes it a little bit. You get some lactic acid, and it kind of changes it, but it's if there's no oxygen involved, it still runs it through there. But it kind of does it differently. But the output of that is different. You don't make the same number of ATP when you have the oxygen and the glucose as you do when you don't have that. And so there's a term that's called anaerobic respiration. Or in other words, fermentation. And you may be familiar with fermentation because there's like different things that ferment. Like if soy ferments and makes soy sauce, right? Or oats or whatever ferment and corn or whatever, and you get whiskey, right? That's the same kind of thing that's going on, but it's a different way that the mitochondria breathes. And basically what basically, to make it simple, what the book says is that what is happening in a cancer cell is that there is damage to the mitochondria for some reason. There's damage. And the damage in the mitochondria is causing the mitochondria to have a problem breathing. And so it's having to switch over. And what they say in all cancer cells is that it switches over to this anaerobic respiration or this fermentation. It changes the mechanism by which it breathes. And it goes back to its primitive stage before it was even incorporated into the human cell. It goes back to that primitive stage of breathing that it had way, way, way back. And that it changes right there. And so there's two things that happen. Remember when we talked about blood sugar and we talked about glucose in the bloodstream, right? And then we got to get glucose out of the bloodstream. So we're going to store it in the cells, but there's a glucose gate. Remember when we talked about the glucose gate? And the glucose gate it wasn't opened enough to get the glucose in there. So we had to have insulin come hit the receptor on the cell wall and open the glucose gate so that we could get glucose into the bloodstream. I mean, out of the bloodstream and into the cell, right? We talked about that on one of our previous shows. Well, as soon as in a cancer cell, there's two things that happen. Number one, the mitochondria sends a signal to the nucleus. Because in a normal cell, if the mitochondria is having trouble breathing, the nucleus is going to create apoptosis and kill the cell, program cell death. The nucleus is just going to say, hey, look, we're not working properly. We're not carrying this forward. Shut it down, kill it, right? That's what a normal cell is going to do. Well, in a cancer cell, for some reason, when the mitochondria starts to have trouble breathing and making ATP, it sends a signal to the nucleus that says, hey, don't do that. Don't kill us. Don't kill us. Don't kill us. I'm trying to fix the problem. I'm trying to breathe. Don't kill us. And so it stops. There's a signal from the mitochondria to the nucleus in a cancer cell that tells the nucleus to halt apoptosis. Okay, that's the first thing that happens. And then the second thing that happens is that it sends another signal over to the glucose gate, and it basically opens the glucose gate wide open and puts a little doorstop underneath the glucose gate. So it opens up the glucose gate so that you can just freely get glucose, as much glucose into the system as possible, to give it a chance to get that lactic acid and all that process going so that it can do the fermentation. Okay? So those are the two things that happen in a cancer cell. The cancer cell is telling the nucleus, don't kill us, stop that. And then the mitochondria is telling the nucleus, don't kill us. And then the mitochondria is telling the gate to stay open so that you don't need the insulin, and you can just get glucose into the cell as quickly as possible. And that keeps the cell functioning enough. But now it goes back to this deal. We've got this cancerous cell, and we've got this cancerous or abnormally functioning mitochondria. And now when this cell goes to divide, it's going to divide into two cancer cells. And that's when our tumor is going to start to hit us. And it's not so much the cancer that actually kills us when we're dealing with cancer. It's the interruption in the normal body functions that the tumor creates. If you have cancer in your liver, it doesn't really bother. It's not really that big of a deal unless it disrupts the function of the liver, right? So if your liver has cancer in it, but it's functioning fine, you'll live for a long time. But if the cancer starts eating all the tissue inside the liver, if the cancer starts growing and getting bigger and getting bigger and getting bigger, and now you've got this spread of cancer in your liver, or you've got this tumor that's getting bigger and bigger. Now you got a grapefruit-sized tumor in your liver. It's the tumor size or the disruption in normal liver function that kills you. That's the part that actually kills you, right? It's not the cancer that kills you. It's the malfunction that the cancer causes that actually kills you. And so this is what's happening inside the cell of a cancer cell, according to Dr. Seyfried. What he's saying is that your body is going to kick into this alternative, and it's called the Warburg theory of cancer. Cancer arises from damage to cellular respiration. Energy through fermentation gradually compensates for insufficient respiration. That energy through fermentation, because we've got so much glucose, we can go through the old way of making energy. Cancer cells continue to ferment lactate in the presence of oxygen. So now all of a sudden, that's the Warburg effect. enhanced fermentation is the signature metabolic malady of all cancer cells. And so this is on the origin of cancer cells, Otto Warburg, Science, 24 February 1956. Okay, so that's called the Warburg effect. And he's a German guy. And he's the one that discovered this, that when you get a damage to the mitochondria and you get damage, the the problem with the mitochondria breathing, that starts the problem. Then the mitochondria sends the signal to the nucleus to tell the nucleus, don't kill us. Then the mitochondria sends the signal to the gate to open the gate. And now that it can keep the fermentation process going. Cancer cells continue to ferment lactate in the presence of oxygen because there's a massive amount of glucose that's going into the cell. And that's what keeps the cancer going. So what Dr. Seyfried's argument is this: if it's glucose in the bloodstream, that's keeping this cancer process alive, what would happen if we would get rid of glucose in the bloodstream? Let's just cut the glucose out. Now, how do you cut the glucose out in the bloodstream? Well, have you ever heard of the keto diet? Right? Now we have to completely switch what we're going to do. We have to completely switch what we're going to do, and we have to quit using glucose as the fuel source. And now we have to use ketone bodies. We have to go when your body goes all the way down and it runs out of glucose, it's going to start using your fat to start off with. It's going to start using your fat to create ketone bodies. And it's going to send the ketone bodies into the nucleus, into the cell. And then all of a sudden, we're going to substitute the ketone bodies into the process to make the ATP. So we can have cellular respiration by getting into a ketone diet. And when I originally read this book, I didn't find it today, but there's a sentence in this book at the back of the book when he starts talking about the ketogenic diet. He gets into the book and he starts talking about the ketogenic diet, and he writes a sentence in here. And when I read the sentence, I promise you, it was almost like the words popped off the page and hit me in the face. I went back and looked at them, and they're not in bold letters. They're not bigger letters. They're just plain. It's the same font and the same as anything else. But the sentence said, if you have a patient that's got cancer, you should get them on the ketogenic diet. Like Dr. Seyfried, he doesn't mix words, man. He comes at you. And he's like, I don't believe that the problem's in the nucleus. I don't believe we're spending the money like we're supposed to be spending the money. I believe that it's coming from, we got to control the glucose in the diet, and that's the way we would control the cancer, right? And that's what the whole thing is about, is exactly how do we we could kill that off. If we don't let it ferment, if we don't let the cell ferment, it's going to die. It's good because it's on its last leg. It's used all the other ways that it knows how to use to get to breathe, and now we're going to just choke it out by not letting it have any glucose. So what does that mean? That means we'd have to go into a ketogenic diet. And what is a ketogenic diet? That means a diet where you're going to get less than 10%. You're going to have less than 10% of your total calories coming from glucose. That means you got to cut out all the things that give you glucose, and you got to get on a diet that is strictly, it's like fats and proteins, where you get on a diet. The other main thing that Dr. Seyfried says is caloric restriction. You've got to take your diet, and you've got to fast. You've got to fast, and you've got to decrease the amount of calories that you're eating. You got to go down to that caloric restriction level. You got to decrease the amount of calories, because what you're doing is you're not taking any glucose at all. You're not going to take any glucose. You're going to make your body burn all the fat. You're going to make your body go into ketosis. You're going to eat fat. You're going to eat protein, but you're not going to get any glucose from any of that stuff. But you're also going to go into this caloric restriction, which gets back into that idea of autophagy. And if you remember, we had autophagy. Autophagy was, remember when we broke down the book on the very first week with the end of Alzheimer's? And if you don't have that, you can go back. The first Wednesday of September, we broke down the book, The End of Alzheimer's. And what happens in autophagy is it's like cleaning house. When you get down there and you don't have any calories and you're restricting those things, then what it makes the cell do is it makes the cell say, hey, look, we have got to get rid of any excess waste. We got to clean this up around here. And if autophagy in the brain helps us get rid of that amyloid plaque, right? Well, autophagy inside the cell helps us get rid of these abnormal mitochondria. So if we've got some trashed out mitochondria that aren't working properly, and we get into that caloric restriction zone, we can decrease our caloric restriction, which puts us in that fasting state. We're not eating anything, right? So we put ourselves in a fasting state. Now our body will clean up that cell. So it will go in there and say, hey, we're not using this trashed out mitochondria anymore. We're going to get rid of that. And now we're going to clean this place up, and we're only going to use the nice, healthy mitochondria to create energy, and not any of these damaged mitochondria that's having a problem breathing. So that's kind of that's like the big picture of the whole thing. And then in the Tripping Over the Truth book, Mr. Christensen, he talks about, he gets into the superfood fuel, right? And that's what he starts talking about it, but he says it so much better. He says, starting with the conviction that cancer is tied to metabolism, Seyfried began a pilgrimage to understand why. A broad circle he began with gradual tightening, described ever smaller circles until he arrived at the center, a single metabolic theory of cancer. Like a star collapsing in and on itself, his work returned to the therapeutic question of which it began. With a comprehensive theory in place and a framework of understanding built, his lab could use the theory as a starting point and map to design therapies to treat cancer. Seyfried had noticed that simple caloric restriction shrank tumors. Simple caloric restriction, he's in his work with mice. An observation that he could now justify through a theoretical framework. Now it made sense. Caloric restriction drives down blood glucose, forcing cancer cells to ferociously compete with healthy cells for the fuel that they so desperately crave. But he reasoned he might be able to do better. He modified the diet slightly, keeping overall calories restricted, but eliminating carbohydrates in favor of fats, and modification that put even more metabolic pressure on the cancer cells. So not only did he restrict calories, which caused the weak cells to have to fight with the healthy cells, but he also got rid of the carbohydrates, which got rid of the glucose. With no carbohydrates, the body is jerked out of its preferred state of metabolic energy generation. You get rid of the way that we usually do it, and it's forced into manufacturing molecules called ketone bodies to take the place of glucose as a source of circulating fuel. Once cancer is framed as a metabolic disease, ketone bodies develop an interesting therapeutic potential. Unlike glucose, ketone bodies burn oxidatively, meaning with oxygen. They have to be metabolized in healthy, functioning mitochondria, which Seyfried knew cancer cells don't have many of. Metabolically, normal cells have other options, but cancer cells do not. If cancer was truly a disease of dysfunctional mitochondria, a diet regime that he coined the restricted ketogenic diet, one that transitions away from utilizing glucose as an energy source to the use of ketone bodies, might have more impact than simple caloric restriction. It's an interesting thought, right? it's an interesting thought that if you have cancer, and I'm not telling you how to treat cancer, I'm just sharing what I learned from these guys. That hey, look, if we can, if you go into a restricted calorie diet, you fast, which is the same thing they said in the end of Alzheimer's book, and you go into a ketogenic diet where you substitute your carbohydrates for fats, you can actually choke out some of your cancer cells, according to Dr. Seafried. So we're at the end of the show. I hope you guys got something out of that. I know it was complicated, but it was I think it's really good. If you think you might be dealing with cancer, or if you're not, you can still get rid of some of those bad abnormal cells by restricting caloric intake and getting into that ketogenic diet type of body. So that's the end of the show. I'll see you guys next week. No, I'll see you tomorrow night. I hope that made sense for you guys on Facebook. If it's the two books, Tripping Over the Truth by Travis Christofferson and Cancer as a Metabolic Disease by Thomas N. Seyfried. You can look those up. If you're dealing with cancer and you really want to get serious about how you get rid of it, maybe this might help you, or maybe it might be something you talk to your doctors about, or maybe it might be something that you get after yourself. So hope you guys have a good night, and we will see you guys tomorrow night at 6 o'clock.